My sister tried to steal my boyfriend and slapped me. 6 years later, my parents ambushed me with her at my bridal shower. I'm 27 now, and I haven't spoken to my younger sister, who's 25, in almost 6 years. It all goes back to one awful incident I'll explain in a bit. Growing up, our sibling rivalry was intense, way more than just typical bickering. For reasons I still don't fully understand, our parents never stepped in to ease the tension. If anything, they kinda stirred the pot, always encouraging us to one-up each other. Looking back, that really did a number on us. Instead of bringing us closer, it made us jealous and resentful. And honestly, if they just put a stop to it early on, maybe we could have found some common ground as kids. But that's not how it played out. As we got older, that resentment just kept building. By the time we were in high school, we barely spoke, and we liked it that way. Things actually got easier when I left for college. I only had to deal with her when I came back home for visits, which was a relief after years of feeling like I had to constantly defend myself in my own house. It was around the time I was getting ready to graduate that I started dating my fiancé. We've been friends for 3 years throughout college, and just before graduation, he finally got the courage to ask me out. I was into him too, so I said yes. After college, we moved in together. It didn't feel like a big leap since we already knew each other so well. 3 months into living together, I decided it was time to introduce him to my parents, so I brought him home for dinner one weekend. Turns out, my sister had also decided to come home that same weekend. She had just started college too, but she was back at the house, which was already setting off warning bells in my head. The timing couldn't have been worse. At that point in my life, things were really starting to fall into place. I had a steady job, a cozy apartment, and a sweet, loving boyfriend. On the flip side, my sister wasn't doing so great. She didn't get into her first choice school and had to settle for her backup, which had already put her in a sour mood. Later, my parents told me she'd been having a tough time making friends, which explained why she kept coming home every weekend. Anyway, when I brought my boyfriend home and introduced him to everyone, it was clear my sister wasn't thrilled. She stayed off to the side, sulking. My boyfriend already knew our relationship was rocky, but I still made the effort to introduce them. The moment I said, "This is my sister," something just shifted in her. It was like a switch flipped. Suddenly she was all smiles and charm. I tried to brush it off, telling myself not to let it get to me, but it fell off. From that point on, she started acting completely different. While we were sitting around talking, she kept finding ways to engage him, asking about his life, what he liked, what he was into. Both of us were a little unsettled by it, but we stayed polite and didn't say anything. But things got worse at dinner. She crossed a serious line and started openly flirting with him right there at the table, with me sitting next to him. There was nothing subtle about it either. It was painfully obvious she was doing it just to get under my skin. I tried to keep it together at first because I didn't want him to see just how messy my family could be. But eventually, I snapped. I told her to knock it off, that he was my boyfriend, and it was downright disgusting the way she was throwing herself at him. She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic and just kept talking to him, like nothing happened. That's when I lost it. I started yelling, telling her she needed to show some respect. He was a guest, my guest, and she was making him uncomfortable. Then she hit me with the line that pushed me over the edge. She said she could tell my boyfriend deserved better, and she was just doing him a favor by showing him there were other options out there, like her. I saw red. I started cursing at her, and she fired right back. At some point, I called her a loser and said she was just bitter because her life wasn't going as well as mine. That one really got to her. Next thing I knew, she reached across the table, grabbed a handful of my hair, yanked me toward her, and slapped me across the face. I was so stunned, I couldn't even react at first. We hadn't laid hands on each other since middle school, but this turned into a full-on fight. My parents and my boyfriend had to pull us apart because we were absolutely going at it. By the end, we were both scratched up, bleeding, and still screaming. My boyfriend finally managed to drag me away, got me in the car, and drove us back home while I sat there fuming and trying to calm down. Thank God he was there, because I don't know how far that fight would have gone otherwise. After that night, I completely cut my sister off. We'd fought before, sure, but never like that. That was the final straw for me. And honestly, I was already living apart from her, so I didn't feel any obligation to keep her in my life. The next day, my parents called to say they'd scolded her. She wasn't ready to apologize yet, but they hoped we could patch things up eventually. I told them straight up I didn't want to fix anything. I wanted things to stay exactly the way they were, because I didn't want any part of her in my life. They tried to change my mind, but I shut them down. I told them this was partly their fault. From day one, they never addressed our toxic rivalry. In fact, they encouraged it. So they had no right to act surprised that we turned out like this. They didn't take that well, and we ended up arguing. But a couple days later, they called again and said they realized they'd made mistakes and wanted to apologize. It didn't change much at that point, but I accepted their apology anyway. I had already made up my mind that I wasn't going to speak to my sister again. I didn't want things to fall apart with my parents too, so I made a conscious decision to keep that relationship intact. Now here we are, 6 years have gone by since that blowout with my sister, and we haven't spoken once. No texts, no calls, nothing. I do know she still talks to our parents regularly, and they have what seems like a normal relationship with her. Honestly, that's fine by me. As long as no one was pushing me to reconcile with her, I had no problem with it. I've seen her in passing at a few family gatherings over the years, but we always keep our distance. Even during the holidays, we steer clear of each other completely, and I actually prefer it that way. Pretty much everyone in the family knows we aren't on good terms, but none of them know the full story. They just know we had a falling out. I made sure to keep the details under wraps because, truthfully, neither of us looked good when it all went down. So for 6 straight years, I never brought it up with anyone, not my friends, not even my family. But that changed recently at my bridal shower, of all places. My maid of honor had planned a sweet little celebration, just a cozy mix of my bridesmaids and a few close family members. Even my fiancé came, since we weren't doing the whole girls-only thing. I wanted all my favorite people there. And then, out of nowhere, my parents showed up with my sister. I have no clue what they were thinking. When they walked through the door with her, I was completely caught off guard. And to be honest, she looked just as stunned to see me there. The entire room went quiet. You could feel the tension the second they entered. It was like time froze. Total standoff. After an awkward silence, my parents walked over and stood between us. They turned to both me and my sister and said something like, "It's been 6 years, and so much has changed. You're both older now, more mature. It's time to move past all this and make peace." Judging by the look on my sister's face, I'm pretty sure they'd lied to her to get her there. And before she could even say a word, I calmly told my parents they had no right to pull something like this, especially not on a day that was supposed to be special for me. I politely asked them to leave, and to take her with them. I was doing my best to stay composed and not ruin the event, but my parents wouldn't budge. Instead, they told me to just let it go, as if what happened all those years ago was nothing major. That really ticked me off. So right then and there, I reminded them and everyone else in the room what exactly had gone down. I laid out the whole story, not to make a scene, but to make it clear why this wasn't something I could just brush off. It would have been one thing if I were marrying someone new. But no, I'm marrying the same guy my sister had shamelessly flirted with the first time I introduced him to my family. She treated him like he was some kind of prize in a competition he never agreed to be in. And when I confronted her about it, when I called her out for acting like a loser, she didn't just snap back with words. She physically attacked me. That was the first time in my life someone had ever hit me like that. It was humiliating. Traumatizing, even. And you know what? In all these years, she's never apologized. Not once. She's acted like it never happened. So no, I didn't feel any obligation to forgive her or welcome her back into my life. Keeping my distance was how I protected myself. I told my parents it was downright ridiculous that they thought they could bring her to my bridal shower and expect me to just go along with it. They were about to argue some more, but thankfully my sister seemed to realize what had happened and left. She didn't look happy about being tricked either. My mom followed her out, probably to calm her down. My dad stayed behind for a bit. I told him I didn't want to talk to him, not right then, because he'd really disappointed me. That's when he got upset. He called me unreasonable and said it didn't make any sense for me to still be holding a grudge over something that happened 6 years ago. He said I was acting like a brat. But honestly, I didn't think I was being immature at all. I just didn't have the energy to argue with him, so I told him to leave too. A few minutes later, he finally did. I had to step away for a little bit to gather myself. The whole thing left me feeling shaken, but thankfully my fiancé and my maid of honor were right there to support me. I pulled myself together and rejoined the party. We carried on as if nothing had happened, and everyone seemed to pick up on the fact that I didn't want to dwell on it. They helped me shift the focus back to the celebration. Later that night, after everything had wrapped up, my fiancé and I went home. We didn't even talk about the incident. We both knew it wasn't worth digging into again. That all happened about 5 days ago. Since then, I hadn't heard a word from my parents, and to be honest, I was okay with that. After the stunt they pulled, I figured we could all use some space. I didn't think they'd be reaching out anytime soon, but this morning, they did. Unfortunately, it wasn't to apologize. Instead, I got a frantic phone call from my mom. The second I answered, she started begging me to talk to my aunt and make sure my sister got a job offer she'd been hoping for. I had no idea what she was talking about, so I had to ask her to slow down. That's when she explained everything. Apparently, my sister had been unemployed for about 6 months. Her previous company downsized and let a bunch of people go, and she was one of them. After losing her job, my sister realized she didn't even have enough saved up to cover rent, so she ended up moving back in with our parents. She'd been job hunting, but from what I heard, she hadn't found anything that paid well or suited her taste. My mom had reached out to my aunt for help, since my aunt was launching a new business and had mentioned needing someone to head up her marketing department. That just happened to be the field my sister had experience in, so she agreed to give her the position until everything blew up at my bridal shower. After I told the story of what really happened between me and my sister 6 years ago, my aunt stopped returning their calls. Eventually, she pulled the offer altogether. Honestly, that didn't surprise me at all. I've always been kind of the favorite niece, and more importantly, my aunt isn't the type to ignore red flags, especially when it comes to business. When my mom forwarded me the message my aunt had sent her, I thought her reasoning was completely fair. According to my aunt, after hearing my side of the story at the shower, it was clear my sister had unresolved anger issues. The fact that she hadn't even made an effort to apologize, not then, and not ever, really didn't sit right with her. Turns out, there had been another candidate in the running for that job, someone more qualified who had interviewed weeks earlier. My aunt had originally passed on them because she wanted to help family. But after seeing how my sister handled herself, or didn't, she decided to go with the better candidate. Honestly, I was relieved. If my sister had gotten that job, it would have been a textbook case of nepotism. And speaking as someone who's had to deal with the fallout of nepotism in the workplace, I didn't want my aunt to become part of that problem. So when my mom asked me to intervene, I told her the truth: I couldn't do anything. My aunt had found someone who was clearly better suited for the role, and that's what should matter most. I said I wasn't comfortable calling my aunt about something so personal when it involved her business. That wasn't my place. But my mom didn't take that well. She lost it on the phone, started yelling at me, saying I was purposely trying to destroy my sister's reputation in front of the whole family. She said I had no reason to bring up the past at my bridal shower, especially after staying silent for 6 years. According to her, I only spoke up because I wanted to make my sister look crazy and make myself out to be the victim. She even accused me of triggering the fight years ago by calling my sister a loser, like I had asked to get slapped across the face. For the record, when I told the story at the shower, I did mention that I had said that to her before she lashed out. I wasn't trying to hide my part in it, but calling someone a name doesn't justify getting physically attacked. So no, I didn't ruin her image. I just told the truth. Still, the phone call got so nasty and hurtful that I ended up hanging up and blocking both of my parents. My sister's been blocked for 6 years anyway, so nothing new there. But since then, I've been stuck with this question in my head: was I wrong to talk about it? Did I really do something awful by sharing that story? On that call, my mom kept insisting my sister had changed, and I hadn't even given her the chance to show it. She made it sound like I was being cruel for not letting the past go. And while I still don't believe I did anything wrong, her words left a mark. Update. Hi again, thanks to everyone who took the time to read my post and leave such thoughtful comments. Your kind words and advice really meant a lot to me. Now, here's what happened after I blocked my parents. With no way left to reach me, calls and texts both cut off, they decided to show up at my door. Mind you, my wedding is just a couple of weeks away. My plate's already overflowing, and the last thing I need is to deal with more drama. The timing couldn't have been worse. I had just gotten home from work, and my fiancé and I were about to head back out for a last-minute dress fitting with my designer. But with my parents standing at the door, we couldn't even get out of the house. I knew if I opened the door, they'd just latch on and make it hard to leave. I even threatened to call the police, not because I wanted to, but just hoping it would scare them off. But they stayed put. And honestly, I didn't want to go that far. I didn't want to be the kind of person who calls the cops on her parents. So after a quick huddle with my fiancé, we decided we'd let them in, hear whatever they had to say, and then get on with our day. Once they were inside, I told them they had 5 minutes, because we had somewhere to be. Thankfully, they didn't beat around the bush. They jumped right into it, same argument again. Because I'd told the truth at my bridal shower, my aunt had taken back her job offer, and somehow, that was my fault. So now, it was apparently my responsibility to fix it. I shut that down immediately. I told them I had already explained everything to my mother on the phone, and I wasn't going to go over it again. Showing up uninvited to make the same argument wasn't going to change my mind, especially not when they knew how busy I was right now. But then my sister spoke up. That caught me off guard. It was the first time she had actually spoken to me in 6 whole years. Anyway, my sister finally spoke up, and what she said next completely caught me off guard. She told me the real reason she came wasn't about the job or anything our parents were pushing for. She was there because she felt like she truly owed me an apology. Honestly, I didn't even know what to feel in that moment. I was confused, guarded, and honestly still a little skeptical. I didn't trust her. How could I after everything that had happened? So I didn't sugarcoat anything. I straight up asked her if she was only apologizing because she thought I could help her land the job. And if that was the case, I told her not to bother because I couldn't do anything about it even if I wanted to. She looked a little taken aback by how blunt I was, but she kept her cool. She said that our parents were the ones coming around to talk about the job, not her. She was only there to apologize, really apologize, and, judging by the surprised looks on my parents' faces, they hadn't been filled in on that part either. Still, she didn't seem to care about what they expected. She said she didn't even want the job anymore. What mattered to her was being honest with me. She told me she'd spent years, 6, to be exact, reflecting on how she'd treated me. And every time she thought about saying sorry, she'd come up with some excuse to put it off. But after the bridal shower, she couldn't hide from it anymore. She admitted that she'd been cruel and unfair to me, and there was no denying it. Her tone, her body language, everything told me she was serious. My fiancé and I just stood there, speechless, trying to take it all in. She opened up about how, ever since we were kids, she felt like she constantly had to measure up. That pressure had built up into resentment, directed straight at me. She said she spent most of her childhood and teen years treating me like some kind of rival, always trying to win, even when there wasn't a contest. And now, looking back, she saw how pointless it all was. She even admitted that we could have been friends. She remembered the times I tried to be kind, to reach out, but she had always shut me down because she couldn't see me as anything other than competition. Hearing her say those exact words, it really hit me. That's how I'd felt all along. I didn't want to admit it, but I actually teared up listening to her say it out loud. Then she turned to my fiancé. She told him she was deeply sorry for how she acted the first and only time they'd met. She confessed that she'd gotten so wrapped up in trying to beat me that she hadn't realized how ugly her behavior had become. She said she owed him an apology too, and that it was long overdue. And then, before we could even respond, she said we didn't have to forgive her. She just needed to say it to finally get it out of her system. And with that, she walked out. The room fell completely silent. It was just me, my fiancé, and my parents, all sitting there, trying to wrap our heads around what had just happened. None of us had seen it coming. After a few minutes, my parents left without saying much, and my fiancé and I headed out for the dress fitting. We didn't talk about it at all until we got back home later that evening. It wasn't until about half an hour after we returned that we finally sat down and unpacked everything. I have to admit, I was really impressed with how mature my sister had been. It took her 6 years, sure, but she owned up to everything and seemed completely genuine. My fiancé and I are still processing all of it, but we're leaning toward reaching out and letting her know we forgive her. I've already unblocked her. I just need a little more time before I tell her directly. But one thing I do feel good about? Even if it took years, she came to understand that we could have been allies instead of enemies, and that means something to me. Update 2. Hey again. I realized I never mentioned what I was planning to do about my parents in the last update. Honestly, I was so focused on everything with my sister that it just slipped my mind. It's been a few days since that visit, and my parents haven't tried to contact me since. And I don't think they feel bad about any of it. The way I see it, they had one last chance to be better parents, and they blew it. I've spent years trying to keep the door open for them, even after all the damage they caused between me and my sister. We've had more arguments than I can count, but I kept forgiving them, kept hoping they'd change. But I'm done doing that. I can't keep making excuses for people who clearly don't care about my feelings, or, frankly, even my sister's. So the decision's been made. We're not going to speak to them anymore. And at this point, I'm pretty sure they won't be coming to the wedding. Just to make it official, my fiancé and I decided we'll reach out in a few days and tell them clearly, they're no longer invited. That's the end of that chapter. Update 3. Hi again, just one last update. I got married last week. It was beautiful. Seriously, everything went off without a hitch. It was exactly the kind of day I'd always dreamed of. As expected, my parents didn't show up. My husband and I didn't even end up reaching out to them. A few days before the wedding, they sent me an email saying they wouldn't be attending. They claimed there had been some terrible misunderstanding and that my sister and I had started villainizing them unfairly. They said they didn't need me to spell it out, they knew we blamed them for the way things turned out between us. According to them, they had always done their best as parents. And now, they decided to take a step back and live their lives without constantly worrying about their ungrateful daughters. Honestly? If that's what they want, I'm okay with it. On a brighter note, I did reach out to my sister a few days before the wedding. I told her I accepted her apology, and I'd love for her to be there on my big day. She accepted the invitation with so much grace. And she came. She was there. It turned out to be one of the happiest days of my life. If you had told me a few months ago that my sister would come to my wedding and my parents wouldn't, I would have laughed in your face. But here we are. Life is funny like that. I'm just grateful it all worked out. My sister and I are finally starting to rebuild something real between us. And who knows, maybe someday my parents will come to their senses. Maybe they'll apologize too. But for now, this peace, this growth, this new beginning, it's enough. My husband and I are heading out for our honeymoon soon, and honestly, life's never felt better.